Hi, Barbarian here. Are you a game master looking for an amazing game world rich in lore and strange new creatures to run your D&D or Pathfinder 2 game in? Well, look no further than the world of Battlezoo, Indigo Isles. The world of Battlezoo, Indigo Isles contains everything you need to set sail for adventure. Except maybe a boat. You're probably gonna have to buy your own boat. But the book itself contains a detailed overview of key locations on the Indigo Isles, dozens of story hooks and NPCs, and details on the ancient spiritual religion known as the Eld. Wow, that sounds spooky. Don't forget to take your weapons with you. You'll also get 15 new dragons as monsters, featuring the entire family of wild dragons from the Battlezoo Ancestry's Dragons book to help you murderize your players' precious characters. And you'll get gobs of new magic items to make them feel like they might have a chance. But they won't, will they? What's more, there are tons of new character options, 10 new ancestries, 10, and new archetypes and subclasses and heritages, and seven familiars native to the Indigo Isles. Remember, the world of Battlezoo Indigo Isles comes in 2 versions, one for D&D 5e and another for Pathfinder 2. Oh yeah, and they're releasing the PDF right after the Kickstarter ends. If you'd like a new fantastical world to amaze your players with, click the link below and back the Kickstarter today.
Hey, look at that. We're live, and I have a new background. I decided to make a new one, because why not? And look,
Cool.
I even got your little medal in there, Baron.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that's great.
We have a new guest, someone who's never been on the show ever before. You want to introduce yourself so I don't butcher your name and your medal?
That's
How do you
fine.
pronounce the medal?
I don't know. I feel like I need to ask somebody that knows how to pronounce emojis. I don't know how to pronounce emojis. But no, welcome to the stream, everyone. If you're unfamiliar with myself, I am Baron de Ropp from Dungeon Masterpiece. So, and I don't know what we're doing here today. We're just talking about world building, I guess.
We're not sure. But we usually chat a little before we even get into it, but we can get right into it because strangely, you and I were talking a lot last year, and then, I don't know, things got busy during my other Kickstarter, and then you got very popular, I guess, during the whole OGL thing, because I saw your channel exploded.
Yeah, I kind of did like 3 stages of, I went from like nobody to 10,000, and then again to 30,000, and then again to 60,000 subscribers. And it was like all in 3 distinct phases, I feel like.
Well, I'm stuck at the 16,000 phase, but we don't do recorded. I think if we did recorded content, we would get much higher very quickly.
Yeah.
If we did some like shorter recorded content on focused topics, but that also is a very different skill set and uses a very large amount of time. Even if it's like a 5-minute video, it would take more time than us being on this video for 3 hours doing a 3-hour video.
For sure. One of my, like a typical 8-minute video of mine from start to finish will take about 20 hours of labor to do.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm much rather, everyone knows what they're good at, and Mark and I think we're pretty good at speaking live and like have no fear of it and talking conventions and going on for hours on just about any topic. So that's what we do.
Steven's world class at that.
No, thank you. But yeah, we could do this, and this is what we like doing too. It's like I tried doing recorded content exactly. It's like okay, I just spent 20 hours on this. Let me look at my 3 minutes. I'm like, wow. I'd rather spend 2 hours and get 2 hours.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. No, I've thought about changing because I've had some just general stuff in the past few months that have come up within my personal life that has made it difficult for me to commit 20 hours to making a video. And so my upload rate has become much more erratic, and I've been thinking, like, can I just instead do like a 45-minute TED Talk style presentation with like a slide deck and do it live, and that be also maybe not even as successful as a 8-minute video, like a highly scripted 8-minute video, but some level of production value. Find that halfway point between just a raw live stream where I ramble nonsensically and dreary-eyed into the camera.
Yeah.
Or
well, you can come on our show more often and do that here.
Okay, there we go. Well, thanks for having me to allow me the opportunity to stare mystically and drunkenly into the camera.
Oh, wow, drunkenly.
Be careful. If you gaze too long into the camera gazes back.
Oh yeah,
that's the Black Mirror.
It really is.
And you are also a Gen Con virgin.
I am.
And you're
this is
coming
going to be my first Gen Con and my third convention ever.
Oh my god.
Oh yeah. I don't know why I just never really got into the convention scene, but with enough peer pressure from at least 3 dozen YouTubers, they're like, "You have to go this year."
You do.
So
because this one is
going.
Because if you're going to go to one, if you're just going to go to one convention in your entire life, this is the one to go to.
For sure.
For gaming. And it's just, I haven't been to Essen, so I can't say what that's like. I hear that's also fantastic. I haven't been to the UK Con, which is also supposed to be a lot of fun.
Oh, UK Games Expo?
Yeah.
That one's very big in that area too.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But Gen Con, it's the one. It's like, everyone goes. Internationally, they go. I just got an email from WoTC yesterday. They're going. They even sent me a list saying, I got from their PR people saying, here's all the stuff we're doing if you want to see us. I was like, ooh, I forgot to write back to them. It's like, yes, I'm very interested in meeting with you.
That's fine.
I was like, I don't know if you want to be with me, but I'll meet with you. But yeah, it's, well, yeah, we'll see what happens. If they meet with me, man, I'm going to give them the opposite. I'm going to give them they're going to actually have questions. They're going to be absolute nightmare questions because I'm not even going to ask the hard questions. I'm going to ask the super in depth, why.
I feel like if they give you good answers when you ask those questions, that you'll be.
Oh yeah, I'll totally respect them.
You'll respect that too.
Yeah.
I think that the people who are trying to do marketing for WoTC are probably have a very difficult task in front of them and are probably trying to do a good job at it. And they have not been given an easy role by their corporate overlords.
You're right and you're wrong, Mark. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to tell you why you're wrong. And use experience. If you actually can look this up. So back in my video game days at GDC, by the way, Baron, do you remember the red ring of death for the Xbox? 360.
Yeah.
Okay. So during the Xbox 360 launch, it was so successful that they actually couldn't get Xboxes here fast enough. I don't know if you remember, they were literally loading them onto airplanes and flying them here and losing millions on every Xbox sold because it was so inefficient for them to get them. But they were doing that.
Wait, they lost millions of dollars on every Xbox sold? I didn't even realize
all the Xboxes sold.
In total, I was
on every airplane sold, and not every Xbox. Every airplane worth of Xboxes sold. And I remember who was the CEO? I forgot who was in charge. But if you look it up, I'm actually in Wikipedia for this. It's Stephen Glicker at the Bloggers Breakfast at GDC, I think 2006, and there's a picture of me there. And they were there, and we were asking them. Back then, it was the bloggers because they didn't have there wasn't a word for us. There weren't influencers, bloggers. So,
right.
And it was a Bloggers Breakfast, and we were asking the tough questions about how are you getting your Xboxes here? Red ring of death, and you know what? Freaking Microsoft, they answered every one of the questions, and it was the president, I forgot who it was. It was literally the guy in charge of Xbox, and they just sat down with us and gave us real answers to real questions right there while we're having breakfast with 20 bloggers in the room, and we all had infinite respect for them ever since because they treated it dead serious and treated us with 100% respect and answered anything we said. And after that, I went to many things at Microsoft after that, and it was great. And they always treated us like that. They treated us like adults, and not shills and marketing pawns, and that's how you do it. I mean, it's just that easy. It really is.
Yeah. As opposed to Wizards of the Coast, who what was the event that they did where there was just a general meltdown of
the influencers summit.
The influencer summit, whoa, it's not even so much that the influencers were asking the PR team and the marketing team that was there tough questions that they couldn't answer. Like, that's not even a reflection on the PR team for not knowing the answer or not being able to properly discuss it in a way that states the question. Like, what kind of internal communication discombobulation do you have to where they can't properly respond to that?
Yeah, well, there's always...
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no. There's always 3 levels, and I'm sure you know this, Mark. There's the PR people who basically know nothing, or not nothing, but they'll know what they need to know for PR levels. There's the people who work at the company who... usually they're in the worst position because they probably know bits and pieces but not enough to say anything, and if they do say something they'll be in trouble, so they won't answer your questions, and if they do it's usually bad news for them.
You mean the people working directly on some aspect of
correct, like the developers,
like boots on the ground
right,
level,
and those people are in a bad situation. And then there's the people in charge. And the problem is you often will get the people at the first or the second level, and then that they just make things worse. It's like there's only one level you need to talk to, the people in charge, and that's it. And that's all we're interested in talking to. And
of course, the larger the institution gets, the people in charge have less and less visibility as to like the problems that the boots on the ground are identifying.
Yeah. They might have a lot of other things that they don't know, and sometimes it's actually a middle manager who has the better idea of both directions. But in that case, you don't know what level of middle manager that is in most organizations.
In the video game world, video games were often just big enough that they had a lot of people, but small enough that the people in charge still knew what was going on.
That's a good point.
And I guarantee that WoTC, which just isn't that big, is that same size.
For sure.
Those people, they know what's going on. The top level people know what's going on.
It's not like Deloitte, where there's where they're net operating income is
how big is
Ghana's GDP.
Yeah, but how big is the D&D? The D&D development team is supposed to be like 20 people.
Yeah, it couldn't be more than.
Oh yeah, if you're talking about the D&D development team, sure.
Yeah,
and then you're talking about their middle manager is going to know about that.
Let's say they have 100 people.
But if you're talking about
that's small.
Like the president of all of WoTC.
I'm not talking about the president of all. I'm talking about I'm not talking about the president of all WoTC. But
right?
You know what? But they know what's going on. Yeah, but they know what's going on, and the questions that are being asked, we're not asking, oh, what's the 5th level feat of a fighter? They won't know that answer. I'm asking, who made the
business questions?
Right. Like, right. I'm like, who made the business decision to, redo the OGL? Because there's no way you did not sign off on that, and we're not aware of that.
Yeah. You would. If he didn't know that, that would be probably pretty concerning.
Right, that's even worse. Right.
Yeah, especially when like Hasbro's legal staff, like the entirety of their legal department is less than 50 people, and that's all of Hasbro. That's not even talking WoTC,
Yeah. Well, they have. My lawyer knows lawyers who work for Hasbro. So, like, when I was getting my lawyers to come on, we had to double check to make sure there wasn't conflicts of interest, because some of them actually work for Hasbro, which is because, they're all in Manhattan, so it's like where all the big ones are. It's like all the main, lawyers are. So,
right.
So, should we pivot from this into doing the sort of geopolitical supply chain analysis that you have?
Not right now. We can do that later.
We can do that later. Okay, we'll save that. We'll save that for later.
I will say, if you have questions, please ask us questions. Super chats always get answered first. Please super chat, help support us, channel, all that. Do check out the Kickstarter. It's been 1 week, and
we've already hit 5 additional stretch goals.
Yeah, we hit 5, but we could do more. We can do better.
I think we can.
I know. It's doing really well, but don't wait till the last second. Trust me. And the other thing is, there's a free preview where you can download a sample dragon, a new dragon for 5e and Pathfinder, and part of a new Ancestry. So if you want to see what it looks like, you can do that. And I announced today that we are doing the Year of Legends officially, and that will be our sequel to the Year of Monsters. And we're putting in some very, very interesting creatures in there. I will say that. So
that's fun.
Yes, every month we come out with, I don't know if you're aware, we have this thing called the Year of Monsters. So every month we come out with the new monstrous ancestry you can play. We have the slime, the doppelganger, Stenos, which are Medusas, a dungeon, which we did, mimics.
Yeah, I remember the dungeon.
Yeah, well, we had dungeons expanded. The
Okay.
and demons, and next month is minotaurs. And people, man, there's so many people I know who are playing these. In fact, someone wrote me today and said, "Hey, I was at work today and I heard someone like at lunch talking about Battle Zoo." And I was like, "Really?"
That's
He goes,
so
"Yeah,
funny.
they were playing dragons." I was like, "Oh my god, it's so weird."
I've never heard someone just out and about at random talking about that, but that is super great. That feels really good.
I know.
And I always like it when people are playing Pathfinder Second Edition for the same reason, from having worked on that. But that feels really good.
Yeah. So not all 12 have been announced. I mean, I have all
9
12.
of them have,
9
right?
of them. Yeah, I gave a lot because so this year, and it's going to start pretty soon because the year starts before you know it. So, and we got to get this one out and get people a chance to order it. So I decided to let people know what's coming up. And what was announced? You want to go through
which ones have been announced?
Yeah, you have the list
we announced
here.
Evil Eye, which is a big giant eyeball that sometimes might have like leg stalks or wings, or
completely different than a beholder.
Yeah, because it can have leg stalks or wings or fins, depending on if it's in the water or the air. It's totally different. And they can have curses or eye beams or other things that come out of their big giant eye.
Sure.
There's the Cerebrophage, which has a nautiloid-like creature from Pathfinder called an Incutilis.
Don't get them confused with mind flayers. Completely different.
They're different because Incutilis are things that attach to the back of your head and kill you and then puppet your zombie. But sometimes instead of that happening, they symbiotically link together and form a new organism. And that's called a Cerebrophage because they need to eat brains to continue their existence. So,
they're actually pretty fun. They're pretty fun. They have the artwork on those. I have the artwork's coming in, and the artwork is insanely good.
We have gargoyles,
really good.
and we have put in the outline to like lean on like some thematics to remind people of Disney's gargoyles. So that was a cool series.
If you like Disney's gargoyles and
you're not going to be forced to stay stoned during all of the day because that would not be fun.
We are purposely putting in Disney gargoyle feats and abilities in the gargoyles so you can play Goliath and his kin if you like that show.
That's fun. People
went crazy. Of all the, it's funny, I showed people the cover because those three on the cover, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, is that Goliath?" And I was like, "Okay, I guess that's the one people really seem
gargoyles
to like."
Are one of the ones we knew were the most popular, whereas we guessed that Evil Eyes and Cerebrophages would be popular, but didn't pull them because we wanted it to be a surprise. So they're the only ones we don't know for sure exactly what people think about them, but we have a pretty sneaking suspicion that it's going to be a positive reception.
This is DDB. If I can give you a hero point, I would. It said, "Watching Pathfinder go full McDowell's is fun." Because that's right. It's not McDonald's. It's McDowell's. They have the quarter pounder with cheese. I have the quarter pounder without cheese.
There you go.
It's, hey, man.
Oh, man. Now I want a quarter pounder with cheese.
But I gotta get that at McDonald's with a McDowell's. You can get it all beef patty special sauce. What is it? It's an all beef patty special sauce, onions, pickles, and a sesame seed bun. Ours is all beef patty special sauce, onions on a regular bun, no sesame. There you go. I think that's a quote from McDowell's. Funny, I remember they were filming that right by my house, and I actually saw people there, and I was talking to someone. I was at, of all things, the Forbidden Planet in Manhattan. And the guy was complaining about the filming of this new movie right in front of his house in the Queens. And it was the new Eddie Murphy movie, and it was coming to America. And I always remember that. And that McDonald's they used to substitute for McDowell's, which is a real one, was like 5 minutes from my house. So.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. It's always fun when that happens.
Coming to America. That's such a good film.
That movie is ridiculously, it's incredibly well done and structured and shot, and the acting, and it was the first time you had someone playing real multiple roles. Like now that's very commonplace, but that was really revolutionary back then. Like it was incredible.
No, absolutely. And also like movie. the writing for like the in-universe marketing. Like I can't walk down the beauty aisle with my wife and like not hum to myself "Soul Glow" whenever I like see the hair.
You have
like,
the Soul Glow, you have the
imagine?
Dowels. Like, yeah, they just so good.
These are all BS brands that don't exist. Yet, like they're lodged into our collective memory, you know?
I know. And it was the first film role for Samuel L. Jackson.
Yeah, that's true. Wow.
He played the robber in McDonald's. So
that's so funny.
You say, look, we got to movies quick, Mark. It didn't even take that long.
Yeah, it didn't. So speaking of world building by looking at the geography and politics of the world. So Baron, that's sort of, I guess, one of your specialties. What would you say are some of the, or I guess to start off with, what is geopolitics? Because some of our viewers might not know.
Yeah. No, I think most people don't, and I feel like it's very poorly represented in the media. It's just tossed around as like, whenever what they really mean when the media says geopolitics is world news or world events, which is not the same thing. So geopolitics is a study or like a school of thought that's kind of like a synthesis of understanding geography, geology, economics, international relations, sociology, etc., and is just a way of looking at the world in order to just better understand why things are the way they are and possibly even make predictions about where things are going, if that makes sense, in a much more calculated and non-biased, or at least aware of your own biases way than, you know, reactionary media that you might find on like cable news or something. So don't be scared of the word geopolitics. Yeah, don't be scared of the word geopolitics at all. And I accidentally just kind of became the fantasy world building geopolitics guy on YouTube. Like that wasn't exactly my intent, but I have a background in like IT risk management and geopolitical analysis, like for day job stuff. So, you know, I just geek out and think about it and started talking about it as far as fantasy world building goes, because I thought, you know, it was a good frame for quickly and rapidly building out plot hooks just by looking at, you know, geography and maybe understanding a little bit of lore about the world that you're building. You can very quickly get to plot hooks and just start rapidly generating content for your game in as little time as possible. Like that's the goal. No, I don't want to prep. Like world building's fun, but I don't want to prep. I want to play. You know, that's just me. So it was a lens for me, and I think honestly, I've done a very poor job of describing that's the goal on my channel. That's something I want to revisit and like talk about. Why exactly would we look at it that way? But just by understanding like the geography and maybe understanding 3 or 4 points about a community's lore, you can start to piece together like a couple of things about like what are the big risks that this community of people have to constantly mitigate in order to just survive. So geopolitics is a science, or is it a yeah, I guess it's a science. Is it a craft or a science? It's a weird place in between.
Social science, maybe?
Yeah, it's a soft science. It's like economics.
It's in a tricky spot. And I know that one funny thing that some of my friends talked about, like when we were in college, is like people ask, what's the difference between MIT and Princeton? And the answer is, at MIT, you could take cognitive science as one of the few humanities credits that you need to pass out of humanities. At Princeton, you could take cognitive science as one of the few science credits that you need to pass out science. Right.
Exactly. But yeah, that's accurate. But so the concept of geopolitics just basically asserts that place matters and that organized groups of people within the context of their place have limited abilities to act and react to the world around them and how they solve problems. And that sounds really, really silly when you say it because it seems so obvious, yet a lot of people really miss that. So just as like a concrete example of what I mean, think about what two different communities, one who lives in a mountain valley and one who lives at a mouth of a river. What kinds of problems do the communities have in each of those locations, and how are they different? So a community that lives at the mouth of a river might have really good access to international trade, but they may, if they're on that river, they may not have like heavy metal ore or timber resources that they could get from a mountain foothill area.
So basically, settlers of Catan is geopolitics.
Exact. Settlers of Catan basically is the gamified thesis statement of what geopolitics is. It's all about.
So I need wood for your sheep.
I need wood for your sheep, and not only that, can I corner the sheep market so that I can
That's it.
Control.
Smart. There we go. That's all we had to do. We're trying to figure out a good hook, an easy way to say it. Say, do you like Settlers of Catan? Do you hate Settlers of Catan? Well, we're going to talk about D&D in the Settlers of Catan focus or framework.
Right.
I was like, that's all you had to say. Everyone knows what Settlers of Catan is.
Yeah.
Totally, now I totally
I've never even
get
thought
it.
about it. That's so funny.
Now I get it.
Yeah. So, and something we can talk about too that I want to touch on, just because it's fun, because I like bashing WoTC, is to discuss the geopolitical constraints of Wizards of the Coast. Because, like I said, we're just talking about an organized group of people, and I think that's what makes it so useful for fantasy world building. Mm-hmm. Historically, this practice has mostly been applied to like international relations and state operations in our real world, right? But you can apply that same logic to understand like what a NGO, like a charity organization, would worry about, what a corporation would worry about, and how they interact with their supply chain, mm-hmm. with the human resources and how they recruit, identify legal constraints that other organizations around them, geographically and less so even, what they have to know, how those different things constrain their options. So anyway, yeah, do you guys have anything you want to say or add or ask?
No,
do we have any super
things
chats?
I think when you get into very detailed world building, I think you start thinking about this stuff. Like, I think at the very beginning, people start, with, oh, okay, this person rules this place and there's a dungeon here. And then as you start really building out your world and, you start thinking about all that stuff, like, okay, well, who rules here and why is it this way? And like when we built the Indigo Isles, and I mean, I'd be curious even show you or go through that with you. I mean, it's a big book, but if you ever wanted to look at it, I'd be curious because, like, when I was sitting down with the authors, like, I was really putting in the notes, like, okay, this is what each city and area produces and what they need. And, like, we even have, like, so Gold Crop has a lot of fish. They're kind of like Japan, but their land is really bad for growing food. So they're very fish heavy and, river heavy. So they get a lot of their food from the ocean. And they have, some farming, but it's pretty bad. Meanwhile, you have Bluebell, which is the opposite, which is they have fishing, but not nearly as good, but their land is fantastic for actually planting crops. So they really produce a lot of grown crops, but they also have a yin yang because they also have this thing called the bluebell, which is basically like hemp in a way. It's kind of like a hemp analogy. And, it's like, okay, how many of your lands do you use for hemp production, which is good industrial but not great for food, versus food production? So there's a balance there, and you can see where I'm going. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
I'm going pretty deep into it, but that we were looking, we had to look at those things to make sure that it sounded like a real world, and it wasn't just like, where did this come from? Magic, like, I don't want magic
for sure. And sci-fi settings, I find, are some of the worst at doing the it's just magic thing, which is hilarious. But yeah.
I mean, it kind of makes sense because sci-fi settings are so futuristic that there's just a lot of things that probably should happen and that would make things very, very complicated. Whereas if you have a kind of more medieval but with a little bit magic setting, then some of the geopolitics is a little simpler than when you've got a setting with thousands of different planets that you can get to like super quickly between anywhere in each planet and all of the planets.
Right. Well, yeah. It's I think also it's more of that we have a very specific kind of expectation. We already have a preconceived notion of what is normal per se when we think about like, and not even just Eurocentric fantasy, but like any kind of pre-industrialized fantasy, right? Like we have an understanding what the limitations look like because for some reason that's very familiar in our fantasy world building zeitgeist. But when you start doing really squirrely stuff with, faster than light travel, nobody's really used to that. Like we don't have as humans a really good understanding of how that impacts the world or the universe, galaxy.
Right.
And then to staple on top of that, we also don't have a good framework like geopolitics to understand how to analyze how that might impact your world building.
Yeah. And just our ability to understand scope, right?
Yes.
Like we can all understand the idea that if a nation in our fantasy world that was like the size of France gets blown up by a necromantic magic bomb and it's gone, that's going to have some impact on those other countries around it. And it probably, we can maybe try to logic that out, even if we're not trained in geopolitics or other related fields. But in a sci-fi setting, even like you could just blow up Alderaan just randomly and just like, is there any real necessarily fallout of this entire giant planet just being exploded that affected other planets and trade routes and other things like that? There probably was, but in the setting, it's kind of never discussed, and it's a decision that was made just for like intimidation factors by the Empire. And it's would anyone actually blow up an entire planet?
Especially Alderaan
like
being
ever
one of the most heavy producers of agriculture in the known galaxy, like
well, you know what, it's sci-fi, they can, but you know what, but that goes back to, back in the day, like Civilization was like my go-to in terms of video games. Like we were playing that like nonstop.
Civilization's such a great game.
Yeah, and then if you remember, this is way back, like I'm really going far back, but they were very
excited. Original Civilization?
Well, yes, and Civ 1, Civ 2, but basically Civ 1. And then a little bit later... I
started with Civ 2, so I'm not as far back as you.
Okay, and...
I mean, they're all the same game.
Yeah, they're all the same game, but there was just, it was a revolutionary, game at the time. And then they came out with Alpha Centauri, which everyone was really excited about, and everyone was like, oh, take place in the future. I remember getting it and playing it, and it's terrible. Like, I mean, it was like, because
I liked Alpha Centauri.
Well, I'm going to get to it. It's okay. The game itself is fine, but you are building widgets and watchets and bing bongs and boogies, and like you have like wow, I have no frame of reference for anything. All I know is the numbers are going up. And that is a classic the numbers go up game. Like, okay, that makes the blue number go higher. This makes the green number go higher, which makes me be able to buy bigger tanks and airplanes because I know what those are. Like, that's all it was. It was no like, ooh, I got a granary, which means I now have more food. It's like now I have the super space granary. It was so obtuse and obscure, and you have no frame of reference, which is why science fiction and science fiction MMOs usually fail, and fantasy does. That's a whole thing in video games. Like, this is actually very well known. Like, science fiction video games have to be science fantasy video games if they want to do well.
That's why Star Wars is successful.
They're science fantasy. That's why.
Yeah, it's effectively just fiction. Laser swords instead of instead of steel swords. Yeah. But yeah, totally.
I mean, Alpha Centauri, it wasn't a bad game. It was very hard for me to enjoy since I had no frame of reference. And then also at the time when it came out, it was one of the very first games ever made with voxels, and it was very controversial because of the graphics were kind of muddy. It's probably way better now, but back then it was a big deal. Voxels, remember those? Well, whatever.
Somebody just commented, unless you're Eve Online, which is awesome that they commented that. Kudos to, who is that? Glade Riven? Because that game is used for like economics case studies. It's mind-blowing, the stuff that gets done in Eve.
Yeah, I would never, ever, ever want to play it, but I did have a friend who would give me stories from the most interesting things that happened on it, and those were pretty interesting.
Yeah.
They would not have been interesting to be a part of, even if I knew I was only playing for those parts that were interesting, because they sounded like they would have been like a nerve-wracking disaster to be a part of. But they were just like highly
terrible.
Amusing as stories for onlookers who were just reading about them.
Yeah, I don't even know. I actually played EVE Online in and out and back and forth, and I tried, but it eventually gets very slow, and it's hard. It's just hard, and it's a massive commitment of life to do that. So it's like, I gave up.
It's like you have to have another life.
Yeah,
and not play Second Life.
Well, yeah. But you know what? But I also had that when I was in guilds in World of Warcraft, because that, oh boy, talk about drama. Ugh, I've never had so much drama, but that feels like soap opera drama rather than geopolitical drama.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a
totally different kind.
Yeah, that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing at all. But so for geopolitical, well, how about this? Why don't you give us some examples of fantasy, not real world, but like real world fantasy books and products and movies that you think do the really good job? I imagine, does Tolkien do a really good job with this?
Actually, I don't think Tolkien does.
Oh, okay.
And that's not to say that that's a slam on Tolkien. I think it's just the story that Tolkien was telling was very much one of epic fantasy and not one that was geopolitically centered.
Well, it was supposedly an analogy of World War II.
I could see that. Now, I didn't know that, but I could definitely see that.
That's what he was writing.
Like, that's what a lot of people have said, just based on his own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, it basically, he took the World War II powers and settings and just kind of reworked it in a fantasy world.
Reworked it.
Yeah,
that totally makes sense.
It was, I think, based on his own experience in World War One
and World War One too. Yeah, both of them.
Yeah.
But he was writing about themes that were related to World War II. But he was in World War One, not World War II. That's why you can't write The Lord of the Rings while you're fighting World War II.
Yeah. Right. But he saw what was going on, and he was right there, like right in the heart of it.
Right.
That's pretty well known. What about Game of Thrones? How about that?
So I was gonna say A Song of Ice and Fire is probably one of the best ones, and that's specifically because A Song of Ice and Fire is a fantasy retelling of excuse me. Fantasy retelling of the War of the Roses,
right, and Hadrian's Wall, right,
and Hadrian's Wall. But he does a very good job of really centering the power struggle as it happened in the UK, and not only that, but really demonstrates, like, I think one of the best examples in that film, or in the TV series at least, is when the Civil War is happening between the North and the Lannisters. And the Northern Army is trying to get Rush south to not have to waste time building a flotilla, because that takes a year. They're trying to get through the Riverlands, and there is one key bridge they need to cross, and they've got to work a deal with the Lord of the Riverlands in order to let their army cross, because you can't just take an army through neutral territory. That's no bueno. Like, nobody's gonna peaceably let you do that. So, like, he knows, despite the fact that most of his daughters are ugly, he knows that he's got a serious leverage point in order to get more control, and not only that, figure out a way to protect his family from being sandwiched in between these two large powers. He's got a leverage point there to kind of twist the politics in his favor, for his own safety and for a power grab at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think, and only because of the geography that his family lives in is that possible. Because he's right there on that bridge, and they need that bridge. There's only one.
Right.
Another really good one is Mass Effect.
Which one?
I mean, really, the whole.
Well, I played all three, so just tell me which one.
the whole series is really a good example. I think the first one is kind of, epic fantasy, and the whole thing is epic fantasy to begin with, anyway. But the issue with it's also a very good moral dilemma, but the moral issue between the Rachni, the Solarians, and the Krogan is such a great relationship of how can we take a group of people and modify their demography in order to control them. Because they will ravenously eat the entire galaxy if we let their demography go out of control. But then we also need them because they're the only race that can stop the Rachni, which are going to ravenously eat the entire galaxy if we don't do something about it. So it's just as much a moral dilemma as it is, we've got and that's another thing, is like a group of people's demography, which is to say their ability to produce based on the various age groups within a population, is extremely important geopolitically, because if you have a lot of old people who live in one place or a lot of young people who live in one place, you start to have really wonky economic situations that come out of that. So, for example, if you have a whole slew of young people who die in a war, let's say, for example, like existential crisis of a war. A good example of this is World War II on the Eastern Front. You're just sending your young men to die in the trenches, basically. You don't need a whole lot of young men to repopulate, but you dramatically stunt all the low value add to your economy after the war is over. Because, if you have a ton of elderly people, it takes roughly one person to care for 8 elderly people. So if you have a huge imbalance in the amount of young people, they have to take care of old people, and there's not enough labor left over to like do the normal stuff like making goods, making clothing, making food, so you really throw that, you can really throw that imbalance out. And by having a lot of Krogan who are adults and have no future, they have no children, they go through an existential crisis and, blow up their own planet. They want to blow up everyone else's planet. They're very bitter, and it really shapes their ideology as a result of that.
How would long-lived ancestries affect that sort of geopolitical analysis? Like, I think I've seen something somewhere that talks about the idea that elves would need to have a different political structure and corporate structures than humans, or else they would have a lot of coups from below, because they otherwise are just waiting for, if you were born within 10 to 20 years of someone and you both are going to live about 500 years, you're not going to be able to wait for them to age out of their position. If they're above you, they're just going to be above you forever.
So I think that's a really interesting question, because it also depends on the basic biological, presuppositions of the fantasy race in question. So I think a really good tackle of that is demonstrated in the Fallout series, where you have ghouls that have been alive since, the bombs dropped. And they've lived for, by the time Fallout New Vegas happens, they've been alive for almost 300 years. So, and while they're technically aging, they're still able to produce at the same, physical capabilities that they were, when the bomb dropped. So they're constantly learning new skills. They go do, they'll go be a farmer for 100 years and they'll get really good at it, but they'll also get really bored at it. and then they completely change their entire identity, move to a new part of the wasteland, and try something entirely different. So, and I think elves would probably, an interesting way to tackle that would elves might be doing the same thing, where, and you see this in humans too, for that matter. Like, you'll have somebody who is in a career for 15, 20 years, and then they just get sick of it, and they're close to retirement. And 45, age 45, age 50 rolls around, and they're like, screw this. My kids are out of the house. I can take some risk. I've got skills. I've got some savings. Let's try something entirely different. And they have an entire renaissance, of their career. So it gets really interesting, because you have at that high end level of the age demographic, you get a lot of people in the higher end right before retirement who have a lot of investment capital, have a lot of well-trained skills that they can use from 2, 3, maybe even 4 different careers that they've accumulated over the course of their life. And they can all synthesize all of that information into a really high-end value-added economy, which America is really, or the West is really good at right now, for example. It's really interesting how it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. By focusing on really high end value added stuff, you also diminish your birth rate, because it gets, there's not, as you move from into like a service based post industrial economy, you're turning away, or you make it more expensive to have children, but it's also, the children that you do have take much longer to get to a point where, you can compete at that kind of level, like, right. And you can see it all over the media right now. Young people, it's not just that you have to have a high school education anymore like it was 50 years ago. You have to have a high school education, maybe a master's degree, at least a 4-year degree. You probably need 2 to 3 years of an internship, and that's just to get to a entry level position in some of these high end skill jobs. But you move to a developing nation like Indonesia, for example, and you just need basic reading and writing and a little bit of arithmetic, and you get a job in a factory, no problem. And we just our economy is not developed for that here. So, I think in to circle back to like a fantasy world, you would start to see very long-lived races who, like elves and dwarves, they would be extremely meticulous artisans who are very focused on high value added stuff. And, elves and dwarves, in the typical elf and dwarf kind of state, they would have that, antagonistic relationship, because they both are so lived long, and they both have, this rivalry of extremely high value added craftsmanship. And they both would probably look at humans the same way that humans look at, much shorter lived races like greenskins, who like orcs and goblins and so on, because they don't live as long. Orcs are, according to D&D lore, only live for 40, 50 years, something like that. So their ability to have high value add is very low. So the strategy for survival that would cause that is going to be have lots of babies and take what you can from everybody else, because you don't have the ability or the skill to develop long-term, really high value added economics into your society. It's just raid, pillage, take, maybe do a little bit of agriculture on the side, do a lot of herding, constantly move, strength is strength in numbers, basically, and desperately claw for what you can to survive. So
it sounds like also what you're saying is that the chaotic nature of elves in many of their depiction would help them be a little less stagnant with being ridiculously long lives. They wander off into some other career or start their own company or nation or something like that. But dwarves might wind up with that issue where it's just like, yeah, I'm a dwarven soldier, and yeah, we've had this general for the last 300 years, and that's what it is.
Fine.
And
yeah, and that's just
he doesn't get killed by an orc at some point. He's just going to keep being the general. But maybe also their culture, they just don't care about the fact that there's not much chance for career advancement outside of a major shakeup or some kind of event that changes things.
Right. And like, keep in mind, like, think about, the amount of time it takes to train, like, even something as super menial, just so everybody can get what I'm saying here. Like, think about the amount of time, like, if we've had a like fast food job when we were in high school or something, think about the amount of time it takes to teach a very new person in the kitchen how to do a thing, like even just basic knife skills, right? And then watch a master chef use a knife. Now think about how much better a master chef would be at using a knife with 200 more years of experience. And not only that, think about how the culture would be modified to understand that 500 years of experience of knife work is like the level that you would need to get to be a master in as far as like elven terms would go. So like,
something looked into that. There's actually two things I can think of that actually tackled this very subject is Fables. You never read Fables?
Fables?
Yes. You never read Fables?
The stories?
Yeah, no, Fables, the comic strip, the comic.
Oh no, I've never heard of this.
Oh my god, it's so good.
I heard of that. I thought I was like, is he talking about the comic Fables or something else? And
good.
So I actually have heard of it.
It's fantastic. Basically, it's about like all fairy tale and fables exist, and they live forever, pretty much. And so there's so the best spy in the entire world by far is Cinderella. And they go through this, like, it's so good. And they basically explain, because Cinderella, and she goes and explains that, it's like, oh, how long have you been a spy and doing, like, spycraft? Like, 15, 20 years. She's like, honey, I've been doing it for 500 years. Like, she's like so much better than everyone else. It's not even close. And they have that. They have where people have been doing things for 500, 1,000, 2,000 years, like the Arabian Night people. They've been doing it for thousands of years, and they're so much better than everyone else.
Right.
You should read. They live in Manhattan. The story is incredible. Absolutely.
Okay, I'll look this up. Yeah, I'm gonna write it down. Fables, right?
Good.
Fables.
And it ended. So it actually does have an ending to it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Oh yeah, Fables is great. And the other thing is Highlander. Because if you remember in Highlander, because they also live hundreds of years, and in the show, the ones that were really old were just so fast on their, they were so quick with quips, and like they just knew it. They had hundreds of years to master these things, so they were just better at everyone. There was no contest. Like you couldn't get as good as they are. That's why when you want to go to a doctor, always go to an old doctor. That's serious.
That's good advice.
It is. You want people who have seen it and done it all. I say that in technology too. Just a little bit of my real world. So one of my things about my job, I don't have to do quite as much as we'll do. Actually, you probably do it too. If you do you do like security, IT?
Yeah, I'm a data architect by my actual job title.
That's funny. I do data architecture too. It's,
oh, really?
Yes, we could talk about that.
Okay.
I've never met another one. And to be a data architect, you need to have at least 10,000 hours real world experience at the minimum. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah, we should talk. We should talk shop.
Okay. I'm just newly. I'm at the associate level. I've been doing software for 10 years. So.
Oh yeah, I'm at I figured it out. I'm at like the 65,000 hour mark at this point.
Oh jeez.
Yeah, but that's the point. Is that that we deal. So part of the thing we do security for like banks and stuff, like really high level security.
I don't envy you. I just work on marketing data.
Oh, okay, but and we do banks and pharmaceutical, and when I first started this job, it was very stressful. When things would go wrong, because that's what you're doing is security. And at this point, even the people I work with, they'll be like, oh my God, the sky is falling. And we're just very relaxed. It's like, we've seen it before. And like anything, it's like you do it long enough. It's like the worst thing in the world is really not that bad if you've seen it 10 other times. And then you calmly think it through. It's like air traffic controlling. It's like, you've done. You do it a lot. You see it. It's not as worrisome. When those people worry, then you should worry. When the calm people start to worry, you're in trouble. But it's usually at this point, it takes a lot for me and my colleagues to really get nervous, because we've seen at least one of us have probably seen it before at this point. And I can only imagine, like you're saying, if you're an elf and there is someone who's lived for 500 years, it's like, what is possibly new? What could possibly surprise you or make you worried? Ever.
Exactly. It's like are we actually concerned about a little bit of orc rating?
Right, exactly. I mean, that's like the cicadas are out again. Like, who cares? You know, it's just like same thing. Who cares?
But to that end, like, think about how much, like, sure, murder is a terrible thing. You should never do murder. But think about like the amount of economic impact that a single human has on a society as a normal human being. And now think about how much economic impact an elf would have that lives 10 times as long, and what you've just robbed that community of by murdering an elf.
You know what? That's fascinating, because one of my majors in college was policy management. And in policy management, we used to look at the very first day of like one of our first classes is they would sit down and say, okay, who is worth more? A baby who has a whole world of experience ahead of them, an old man who has, you know, years of experience behind them, or a fighter pilot. And you would have to figure out which of the three and why. And the answer is none of them, because they all have different value. But like the government has to figure this stuff out, and then actuaries have to figure this stuff out, because each of them could be valued for, okay, you have a fighter pilot who's young and has been trained for something that costs tens of millions of dollars of equipment, and they're very specialized and can be used in a very specialized field. You have a baby who's got all this life expectancy ahead of them, and then you have an old person who has all this experience behind them, and you know, has all this life experience that they can train for other people. So who is more important? And that's it's we spent the whole semester just trying to like answer this question.
This is making me come up with ideas for like an oppressive society with elves at the top, not because the laws of the society say that elves have extra privileges, but just because they're older, they've been around, they have more skills than anybody else. And it's just like, yeah, humans can be in charge of our politics, can be a politician or a general or the head of a company, and we can point to a few who have, although, you know, for couple decades, then they die and an elf becomes it again. And in our penal code also, it's based on what Baron just said about what you've taken away from society. So murdering a human, you know, it has a smaller number, it's a lower penalty than murdering an elf, not because we care about the humans in society, but because it is caused less of a harm to society than taking away the potential of that elf. And then they put themselves under this veneer of civility while being like extremely authoritarian and having policies heavily favor the elves.
All right, this discussion
feels interesting.
Well, now it's going to get really deep. All right, are you ready? Are you ready, Baron? Because now you opened up. Now I'm starting to get excited because this is something I've been talking with some people with recently. So right now, airline tickets are insanely expensive. Most expensive. They've gone up over 50%. Everyone knows. Well, one of the reasons is because COVID killed approximately, I mean, the unofficial numbers are somewhere between 2.5 to 3 million people. So basically 1% of the population of the United States was killed by COVID. Now, not only did it kill people, but it killed a lot of older people who had a lot of experience. And so you have people like airline pilots, doctors. You were talking about the top level people who died, and we always had just enough, or, you know, of what those we needed for those segments. So now, not only do we not have enough airline pilots, because a lot of them died, even if 1% died, like that's too many, and more than 1% died, a lot of them are retiring early now because
of COVID.
And they don't want to do this. So now there's a huge shortage of pilots and doctors and all of these this is the fighter pilot. You see how it's coming back. That's why I was like, got excited because I'm like, this is something we've studied. It's like, that's the fighter pilot model. It's like, okay, you have these people with very limited, very specific experience that take decades. Like to become an airline pilot, you don't just become an airline pilot. You have to earn your stripes. It takes a decade to become an airline pilot. At minimum, it takes forever. Yeah. And the international, even longer. Like it can take you 15 years before you start flying those planes.
Sure. Yeah, I've got a friend who is a park ranger in the Grand Canyon, and he's been training to be a pilot, and it's taken him 3 years just to where he can fly from one airport to another without only using instruments, because that's part of the thing. It's like if you're stuck in cloud cover, you have to be able to rely on your instruments entirely.
And there's extremely specific rules on how often they can fly and all that. So there is a real problem, and this is going to keep happening at least for the next 10, 15 years. Is like,
for sure.
Like,
and interestingly, to point that out, like, and just to kind of loop this back to geopolitics, the nature of flying an airline pilot or as an airline pilot, because you're at such a high altitude, you're blasted with radiation from the sun. So effectively, to say it in D&D terms, your con score is lower. So when a disease comes along like COVID, it's going to wreck that like any population that is in poor health as a profession just because of where they work or the kind of work they do. Like, that is now inflated even higher. So pilots really got hammered by COVID as a result of that, and their sedentary lifestyle. A lot of them are overweight. A lot of them have diabetes, and diabetes was also one of the leading contributors to people who died from COVID.
Yeah, basically. So, I mean, I did I did a lot of pharmaceutical websites during COVID, so I was right there, like with I did a lot. So I was always on top of it and like talking to the doctors, and that was basically it. It was like the biggest analogy is. And this isn't the only one, trust me, I don't want to get into it, but it's general health. Like, if you were in generally good health, you had a better chance of fighting it. If you were not, you were not. And that was, and that's a general 100%. Term. But yeah, we have these issues affecting us right now in this world where it's like there's these jobs of these people that can't be replaced easily that they need. Which then goes into weird things like AI, because, and don't ask me why I know all this crap, but most other countries except the United States, I don't know if they changed that rule anymore, but the airlines, the airplanes can actually take off and even land on their own and do everything more or less automated at this point. And some countries even allow it, or they do what's kind of like a computer assist that the airline pilots do assisted land. And I think some like Russia, it's like all automated. But in America, no. I think that more has to do with the unions, is that they have to take off. The first 10 minutes they take off, and the last 10 minutes or 20 minutes they land. And that's all done by pilots. But the rest is pretty much all automated and just handled by the computer. And, what they might do is just go more to AI because they need the pilots, and then they might have to start relaxing some of these, requirements for pilots, while trying to keep it safe. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a really dark joke that I talk about the confluence of how AI will destabilize, or I should say robotics will destabilize the lower end of the value added chain of economics and sea level rise as a result of global warming, which is the only thing that'll keep small manufacturing or low end manufacturing from being able to from increasing their prices is going to be the influx of like migratory people with low skills from developing nations that are subject to sea level rise. So,
you're probably not wrong. I mean, well, that's what's happening.
Sad. It's a sad thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's, and I've seen that as someone who had to deal with it for the first time as a publisher. Like, now I'm dealing with China a lot. Now I'm dealing with shipping, international shipping. And it's very interesting to just see how much of the world's products come from just Shenzhen It's like
Shenzhen, yeah.
It's like 60% of the world's products come from one city. It's ridiculous.
Yep. Absolutely.
It is incredible.
Oh, yeah. We should talk about that later.
We can talk about that. I have learned, I've watched documentaries and I learned all about it, and there's anything you want. And the funny thing is Shenzhen in 1980 had a population of like, I think it was either 20 or 200,000, and then China just decided that this was going to become the city for manufacturing. And now it's got like, what, 10 million? It's just, and that's all it is.
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge.
It's beyond,
it's just one massive factory. Yeah.
It's
a 25 square mile factory.
Every inch of it is covered in manufacturing. And
it's nuts.
I've seen the documentaries where they have these malls where they have these little stands and everyone just sells stuff, and they don't even know, like, because they went to the and this was a Netflix documentary, went to people who were selling like Santa Claus stuff. A lot of them is Christmas stuff. None of them know what it is. Like we don't know what it is. We don't know what to say. We don't know who Santa Claus is. They had no idea. All they know is Americans liked it. It's like.
That's so funny.
I know. They said it was just like, they thought it was some like religious, they're like, oh, I don't know, something they put in their house, it is
a religious icon of a saint, right?
But you know what I mean? They're like, what is this? No idea. Which is also sad. It's like, you ever see, there's a documentary of like the people who like collect cocoa beans, and they're like, have you ever tasted chocolate in your life? And they're like, no. And I'm like, God, it's so
it's bizarre. Yeah, we can talk about the Baudrillardian hyper reality if we want to get real deep and have time, but
oh man, but it's like, so what does this have to do with world building? I mean, I guess because it's all the things you should try to at least. I don't think you need to think about.
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay,
let's talk. Okay, so here is a framework.
Okay,
for if you were trying to decide what to do with your world building. Like, it's really easy to get on this slippery slope like we've been doing here for the past hour, just talking about this stuff and just noodling turtles all the way down, right? Like we can do that for hours. But a framework for thinking about this that I want to leave the chat with here today is the 3 R's of geopolitics. And that is roots,
reading, writing, arithmetic. No, it's a different 3 R's. Okay.
Yeah, it's a different 3 R's. Roots or routes.
Okay.
Resources and relationships. So the 3 R's, what you should think about is so if given a organized group of people, so that could be a faction, or it could be the entire city. And I generally recommend, for world building purposes for RPGs, you think about having somewhere between 1 to 3 factions in a given geographical location. So like in a major city, you would have 1 to 3 factions. Think about what the resources those factions need in order to operate successfully, what the relationships are between those factions, and the routes that they use in order to communicate with each other, and the routes they use in order to move those resources around. And once you really bullet point that stuff out, and it's not too difficult of an exercise. This is something you can do, if you're building a settlement in a place and you've got a map and you're thinking through this stuff, this is an exercise you can complete in 30 minutes, right? Just bullet out all of that stuff and then start thinking through, okay, self, where are these requirements? Like, for example, if the king has to have iron ore coming from a nearby mountain chain in order, because he needs smelting, like his entire economy is built on iron working. So he has to have a steady influx of iron ore from a mine. Where is the mine? What faction is closest to the mine? And how can that faction get in and disrupt it? And there's your quest.
Wow. You know what, Mark? I think I'm going to have my virtual pat on the back. I didn't have these 3, but I think we covered all these in the Indigo Isles world building book, because we have we have this one town, the main town called Seaview, but they really do the bluebell hemp manufacturing, and they have food, but they have a thing called Hither, which is on the other side of the island, and that's the breadbasket, and then they have a thing called the Chow Train, which every day brings all the food from Hither to Seaview. Hinter into Seaview, and it's literally the Chow Train. It's a train of a convoy of food,
right.
and then there's even shops.
Just they've got stagecoaches. They'll switch out the horses because
we even mentioned that
it takes over 24 hours, but not 2 full days. More like 30 to hours to get from Hinter to Seaview, and so it's developed an economy of shops and other things that are built on the side of that route, because Hinter kind of grew up in the middle of the best farmland on the island. And just all the farmers take their produce into Hinter because Hinter is surrounded by that. And then they run these daily wagons to bring it down to Seaview, which is the largest city and the political power of that island that is the center of the hemp bluebell manufacturing.
Yeah, and we also have ships too. There's also ships that go to the other parts of the island, but those are smaller settlements, and they also, some of them are self-sustaining. And then we even have what's the mining settlement?
No,
right. So we have a mining settlement, and how their economy is based on mining, and then we have one. So each one's kind of based on religion and tourism, but we did exactly kind of what you said. We had to think that through of how does the food, or at least I did when I wanted to write it, and design. I was like, okay, here's the food. How does it get there? Chow Train. Okay, Chow Train. We get a train. What happens? Okay, things are going to build up around it because it's now there's economy based on this road, which is just rest stops in our world, and then it's and then you have all these other, so it became this whole cycle, and it was really fun to make. So
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Now, for the purpose of world building, because I don't want to sound like I'm encouraging because you can do this and implicitly just keep creating more and more problems for yourself in your game design or in your world design, right? If you've got Chow Train, now you have infrastructure that needs to resolve the Chow Train, right? Now you've got to have people who breed horses for the carriages. You've got to have all of these things go into it. And it's really easy to get distracted in your world building. And a hard pill to swallow, especially for new DMs, is that your players don't really care. Unless they're really looking for a serious Game of Thrones type of experience. And even then, they don't really care about all this stuff. You're just doing this to have a framework, to develop a world that makes enough sense that you can pick it apart and your players can say, aha, I know where we should go to solve this problem.
Also, I read a lot of lore books just to get ideas to put into my games. And that I do a lot. There was one world, actually it was a super dungeon, and they had a underground Zorn casino. And I was like, I swear to God. And because the Zorn have the mouths, they would throw all the chips and the money into their mouths, and then they would throw it out to make change. And I was like, oh my God, that is so good. And I literally just threw that into one of my dungeons, and people were like, oh my God, a Zorn casino. They were like the craziest thing ever. They loved it. And it was so much fun.
So it sounds like we may have thought that the pitfalls for geography and politics would be not thinking about it enough. But Baron, it sounds like you have to sort of paraphrase the first law of dungeon craft of don't create more stuff than you actually need to make.
Yeah.
By saying one of the pitfalls of geography and politics is to get too deep down the rabbit hole. Yeah, we didn't create tons of stuff that you're never gonna need.
Right, we didn't get into the horses. I mean,
we actually did mention the ranchers that were around there, but we didn't go into detail about it.
No, but we do mention there are ranchers, and the horses do get traded out, and there's rest stops.
Yes, right. Ranchers and rest stops. That the rest stops naturally became where some of the ranches would be, because you can also leave the horses that are tired there, and it gives them a good place to roam around, but it doesn't go into great detail about it.
No, but I don't think you need, I think we did just enough. I mean, plus you and I have read a million of these books, Mark. It's we did just enough to give them hooks, because that's really our purpose.
Yes.
Our purpose is to give you a lot of hooks, a lot of ideas, so you can take these, put them in your world, use them in our however you want. So these are just lots and lots and lots of hooks, and then we're like, oh, that's cool. I could take a Chow train and put it in my world, and
there's more adventure seeds because of the factions and those relationships that Baron was talking about. Like there's a Walmarty mega farm that is trying to buy up the smaller farms, and
the art of the woman who's in charge of that,
and that's causing problems.
That's her on the left side. On the you see,
there you go.
That's
the Walmarty farm is there on the left side, to the left of Baron, all the way.
Do you know who she is? She's modeled after someone. See if anyone can get it in chat. It's a very popular very popular book. It looks very, very, very much like her. I'll give some people a little time.
And they have numerous ethical problems, but they also, they donate to places, and they try to raise their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just like at some point, they own enough of the land that becomes more difficult for other farmers. So
they've been doing that. They're doing what McDonald's did. If you ever saw The Founder, you ever see that movie? No?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, guys.
No, but I read about what McDonald's did.
It's so good. It's got Michael Keaton, and it's such a good movie.
Have you ever read Fast Food Nation, Steven?
Yes, I have.
The book? Yeah, yes. I feel like I got the information I needed about Roy
Kroc
from that.
I'll tell you what they did, since Baron doesn't know.
I don't have to see The Founder.
No, you do. It's excellent. Trust me. It's fantastic, the movie. What they did is that they started to franchise McDonald's, but the people who were the franchisees didn't listen to them, and they would just serve whatever they wanted, but they wanted them to serve exactly the same food. So they realized they brought an accountant on who said, no, you guys are wrong. Buy up all the land and then sell your franchises onto that land. So you're their landlord. And if they don't listen to you, you can pull them immediately. And then so that's their secret, is that McDonald's doesn't own the McDonald's. They own all the land on all the McDonald's. And that's how they keep everyone in check. And then also the land has increased in value, like way more than the McDonald's have over time. And they're actually one of the biggest landlords in the world now, which is fascinating. Sure. But that's then we took that and put that into this world of how they're buying up. What they'll do is they'll, underprice. I mean, there's a lot of unfortunately bad value. There's a lot of real world bad examples of this, especially like in the South and for Black families, of where they will do things to put them out of business and put Black families out of business, and then try to buy them up and then own their stuff. And that's exactly what she's doing in this world. So, but then it also mentions, as Mark said, she donates to so many political parties and has her hand in so many pies that everyone, like the bigwigs, look past it. I mean, while she owns 60% of the farms, and people are starting to get worried. So,
right.
Anyhow,
but yeah. So anyway, as far as how many factions you actually need in your game world, always keep in mind, your players are only playing, for 3 to 4 hours once every week or once every other week, and put yourself in their shoes. They have much less tactile relationship than, for example, you being able to stream an HBO series like Game of Thrones, right? Yeah. So, you're doing too much work in the context of fantasy world building for an RPG. If you've got more than 3 factions, really, 5 is the absolute maximum. You just want to have
it's the 7 plus or minus 2 number.
Yeah.
Because that's all you can keep in your brain. So
that's all you can keep in your brain. But then you've also got to be concerned with the fact that everybody's probably drinking beer while they're playing D&D, and they're not.
So thinking, 5 they're not, plus or minus 2.
Yeah. So
and there might be a week, 2 weeks, or a month, depending on your game, or a week at best.
Yeah.
Between the sessions.
And they're not actively thinking about this stuff between game sessions the same way that the dungeon master is.
Every week, we play our Agents of Edgewatch, which actually has a lot of factions. There's a lot going on in that game because there's all these different types of police, and they each cover different parts of Absalom. And every week I say, does anyone remember what happened? They're all like, I got no idea. And I'm like, guys, we've been playing this thing for 3 years. Come on, really? And they're all like, I don't know. And I'm like, all right, I'll go through it. yet again for literally the 100th time. It's like
you need a very special group if you want to have more factions than that.
Yeah.
Well,
and having dealt with groups that do think about the game sometimes in between, if all of your players are like that, it can be fantastic if you have tons of factions that are all doing their own
I'll be
stuff.
fair, one player.
Almost no groups are like that. And if you have one player who's not like that, then they can just deal with it. But most groups, it's more like only one player is into it that much, or zero.
Yes, because that's what I was going to say. There's one player, Jason McDonald, if you're listening, Jason. He's the quiet one who not only does he know everything that's going on, I will mention an NPC, and he'll be like, oh, yeah, we met her 2 years ago for 1 minute in this session. I'm like, how on earth do you remember? Like, he's the total opposite.
Yeah,
like,
I'm the Jason McDonald when I'm playing in my group, where, because there's always this rule about mysteries. I think that was originally in the Alexandrian that's like, you better put in at least 3 clues that lead to the conclusion you want, and even then,
for sure,
your PCs will probably miss all of them, and they might forget all of them, and they won't figure it out. And our group had like the corollary that was like, if you even put 1/3 of a clue, Mark might figure it out, though. But other than that, yeah, nobody remembers.
Are you
anything,
like Knives Out? Do you ever see Knives Out movies where it has the world's greatest detective, and they're like, okay, we're gonna start they're doing some like detective thing, and he's like, let's start now. And as soon as he starts, it's like, oh, we have a whole weekend planned of mystery and intrigue, and they start the game, and he's like, oh, here's how it ends, and he goes through the whole thing, and it's over. And they're like, all right, well, you just ruined 3 days of fun because you figured it out in 5 seconds because he's the world's greatest detective. And it's like, and he's like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, Glass Onion. That's how Glass Onion starts out. A little bit of a spoiler, but it is very funny. So you're what's his name? I forgot his name. It was like the world's greatest detective, and he literally could figure everything out. The funny thing is, there's a running gag of how he's like, Clue is the worst game ever made because it's completely unrealistic and has nothing to do with deduction. I was like, it's very funny.
Process of elimination.
Yeah. It's good. It's good.
So we talked a lot about how you can go too in-depth with geography and politics, but Baron, are there any things that are common GM mistakes, or even possibly in published settings, but maybe not, that where they don't think about these the 3 R's enough, and like commonly create situations that have like weird friction and cause things to not make sense later on in their stories that they tell?
I find it happens a lot in stories that are like moderately hard sci-fis. I'm trying to think of a really good example. God, Dune just does such a good job.
See, does Dune
do
a
about
good
like
job?
Resources and economics that people mess up, or?
Well, Dune does a good job. Okay, so I'll answer that question by demonstrating how Dune does a good job.
Actually, I would like to hear it, because Dune, as someone, I haven't read all the books, but I've watched videos summarizing all the books ever, and how it gets really messed up towards the end, where as a Polatrace turns into a worm and crap, and like it gets bizarre beyond belief. And
for sure. And I've not read any but the first book.
Exactly.
To be clear.
And the point is like, it's one of those, I give it the George R.R. Martin school of, it started off good and then it got too deep into the weeds, and then it just got out of control, you know, and they just didn't know how to they did exactly what you said. They kept trying to do more world building, and then it started to contradict, and it was too much. And so I'd be curious.
I got turned off of Dune near the beginning. I just was too bored of it.
Oh, it was so
stopped
boring.
Reading.
Everyone said that. I remember when I was a kid, because that came out when I was a kid, and everyone's like, "Oh, Dune this, Dune that." Like, so all they were talking about was Dune, and I tried to read it, and they were like, "Well, the first 60 pages suck, but after that, it gets good." And I could not get past those first 6. I never could.
I feel like reading Dune was kind of like,
never,
to me, based on my memory of it, like sticking your hand in a box that was very unpleasant and that you didn't really want to do.
Yeah. It didn't. Yeah, it was so weird.
Yeah, Dune does a good job of also exploring political philosophy, which is another one of my favorite topics. I just don't talk about it very much. It can get decisive.
Yeah.
But okay, so Dune does a really good job because Dune recognizes that and this is very specifically a critique of what we consider sci-fi nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
If you are because they use a roughly feudal structure. If you are the landowner of a planet, if you are a lord of a planet, you have likely an absolutely immense amount of wealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are still going to be things that you want to have to protect yourself from other people who have absolutely immense amounts of wealth. So what's really weird about this is that with just a little bit of money, you could arrive at somebody else's planet and drop a few tungsten spikes on their palace and completely ruin them. Even if that means that you couldn't have a proper invasion of their planet, because that's astronomically impossible. If it was a planetary existential crisis, planet on planet invasion is likely never going to happen. But for people to maintain the control that they have, because once you get, it's one of those, once you sit on the throne also, or once you act upon the throne acts upon you, right? You develop a fear of losing your power because your life is literally at stake. And that is really well demonstrated by how the emperor of the known universe is very paranoid of the power, the implicit power that House Atreides is gaining because Duke Leto is so popular. And, with enough curry in his favor, a few assassins could knock out the emperor's family, and Bob's your uncle. Next thing you know, House Atreides is the new imperial seat.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to prevent that from happening, he starts, shifting shells around in order to protect his family's power, right?
Mm.
It's totally fear-based.
Mm-hmm.
But also look at what resource is specifically important in order to even allow this power structure to happen. You have the spice melange.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so ludicrously valuable that, the average working class person would never even see or probably even know that it exists. Sure, it's an allegory, and at the time it was written for the fossil fuel industry and how, the United States Navy kind of controls OPEC, but OPEC also controls the United States Navy. It's that kind of a relationship.
Mm-hmm. But
a better example might be because we can just go down to the gas station and get gasoline. So we have an understanding of, a tactile nature of our relationship with fuel. But it might be better to think about it from the standpoint of plutonium. It's such a rare resource on Earth that getting access to it is ludicrously expensive. And then also refining it is ludicrously expensive. Only the extremely wealthy people are going to have access to this. And it's only a resource that is that valuable that is going to warrant having an entire power structure concerned about getting it off world. Right? If you have a society that, you're building a planet, or you build a society on a planet that can't sustain itself, whatever resource is on that planet has to be more valuable than all of the operations that bring supplies to those people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the big miss that a lot of people make when designing a sci-fi setting that Dune gets right. If you are going to have an exoplanet colony, whatever is on that colonial planet
mm-hmm.
that any group of people is going to value has to be more valuable than the entire investment of the
mm-hmm.
colony itself.
Mm-hmm.
and that is so radically missed many of the times. And not only that, if you're going to commit to like a military operation for a planetary invasion, like that is so astronomically expensive, like literally astronomically expensive,
right?
That it would have to be something as potent as the spice that, you know, it causes you to have psychic powers, and, you know, you do your mushroom day trip in order to blink through existence, you know, the entirety of a space fleet, and also gives you prescience, or like, you know, the ability to understand the future in all places in the world. You know, like it has to be that powerful, that it has to be that useful of a resource and that expensive of a resource, that to justify doing all of that stuff.
Would it also be the case that you have a setting where logistics is just ridiculously easy because faster than light travel is just somehow very fast and easy to do? So like getting to a planet that's 3 galaxies away is roughly the same amount of difficulty as getting to a different continent on the same planet.
I mean, so
because of how the technology is gone,
yeah,
like
so
would that potentially lighten the issues if it's like a valuable resource, but one that's found in other places?
So if you have a resource that is so easily accessible that you can rapidly move across an entire star system, like the amount of energy that it requires in order to do that, if you have an ability to generate that kind of energy, then what are you doing at home? If it's so readily accessible, what are you doing at home with your access to that energy that you can't just solve all your problems yourself where you are, right? Like, so you have to look at like, what are the resources that are required in order to make that technology work? Where do you get those resources, and who are the organized groups of people that are nearby that can threaten your ability to get it?
What if that resource is the resource that you're creating the exocolonies for? And let's say it's not like so super rare that this one Arrakis is the only place you can get it. Let's say it's around in a bunch of places, but you need it for your space bending, faster than light travel. And so whenever you find a place that has a lot of it, since you can just ridiculously get anywhere as fast as you want, as long as you continue having enough of the resource, then you would set a colony there. Like, is that something that could make sense, even if it's not like a unique way to get it and there is some on your planet?
So, I mean, it just depends, really. I mean, and I'm only loosely familiar with this bit of lore from the Dune series, but a good example is, I think in later books, one of the smaller houses, the Ix, start working on developing synthetic spice. And that is a huge threat to the Emperor and a huge threat to the Spacing Guild, because they basically control who goes where, right? Like it's all fake honor system as long as the Spicing Guild is getting what they want. So, you know, the spice must flow, right? We've got to have the spice. But the moment that the Ix is able to produce synthetic spice, now there's 2 sources for it. So you lose your monopoly. And it creates a lot of political tension there. So, it just depends on what are the goals of each faction, and what do they stand to lose, and how can that loss be easily caused by other factions having different ideologies or different needs of their own. So
what sounds like I want to summarize this one point before we move on, as it sounds like the pitfall is, and in sci-fi has this more than fantasy, trying to get at a resource that is so expensive to go to where it is and get it for yourself that it is sort of outcosting the actual benefit of the resource. Right.
Yeah. So, no, that would be it. So what were you going to say, Stephen?
A few things. One, are you a fan of World War II? Because, like, specifically the Pacific, the Pacific
Theater. I'm not a fan of war.
But you know what I meant. No, but did you follow? Like, because so much of what you describe is pretty much describing World War II, especially the Pacific Theater.
Not
so much
Theater.
the Eastern, but the Pacific Theater was literally this, like, you know, like all these like small, like, you know, islands that they would have to take, and even the whole reason, like Japan, you know, one of the main reasons they went to war with us is because they're like, well, we control rubber, and you need rubber for everything, so we'll just attack them, and they'll have to, you know, give us what we need, because then they can't fight their war on the Eastern Front with our rubber. But then exactly what the Ix did is like, well, when that happened, the United States figured out how to make synthetic rubber, and then and then things got really bad.
Things got real weird.
Yeah, I mean, things got real weird. But it's
the conflict in Vietnam. That was also over rubber, basically. That was the only reason that the France and Michelin gave a rat's ass about the Vietnam War. They were ready to leave. They were ready to leave NATO. And it was because of Vietnam or the Vietnam War and Michelin's interest in Vietnam that largely played into why we ended up there. So,
no, it's interesting because like everything you describe obviously has these real world connotations, and we're not talking about like real world like it's easy to see these connotations in the fantasy world because it's like because back then like things were incredibly limited, and if you had a monopoly, that was it. Like how else could you get it? But that even happens now. Like the big thing people are worried about is because rare earth elements. Well, what you know, 95% of all rare earth elements are in China, and everything in the world, in our world now, runs on rare earth minerals and elements. And what do we do now because they own it all? And that is an issue, you know. So this always happens and will continue to happen. Forever.
Exactly. and it's really interesting to look at like what civilizations were like were hegemons as a result of the resources that they had access to and the geography that they were living in at the time when the right technology came around.
So oil is a perfect example.
Yeah, oil made like it's really interesting how, you know, we were doing everything we could to apply any form of leverage on OPEC in, you know, from the 60s forward up until the United States and Canada had its shale revolution in 2008. And once they figured out how to do fracking at a large scale, we basically said,
they've gotten very good at extracting oil, specifically because of OPEC and because they could not be dependent on someone else.
Exactly.
And it's exactly what happened with rubber and all these other. It's like whenever there's a threat, it's like the technology and the government suddenly gets very interested in that one technology, and they very quickly, like quicker than you think, figure out usually ways to make that not happen anymore. So yeah, no, it is interesting. The other thing is everyone keeps saying, have you seen or read The Expanse? Because The Expanse deals with this. Oh my god!
I only
you
know
call yourself an expert because The Expanse is basically that's all geopolitics, and it's about you can watch it. I mean, you can read it, but the series is fantastic, and you can watch it. But that's what it's about. It's about you have Earth, you have Mars, and you have the Belters. And each of them obviously have their own fact. The Belters are people who like literally live their whole lives like in, you know, space, and they're spacers and they live in the belt. And they mine asteroids, things like that. You have Mars colony, which is dedicated to building Mars into an Earth-like, Earth. And because of that, everyone is super dedicated. Like the entire world is dedicated to one thing. And also for various reasons, Mars's military is incredible. Like they have the strongest military in the solar system by like miles. Like they're incredibly, like, because they all think the same, they all have the same goal. Like their military, there's no fractions in their military. Everyone is like really focused. And then your Earth, which of course is like the mess, you know, but they still rule everything, but they're of course the mess. And, you know, and then each of them have their own politics. And without getting into spoilers, is that what the series is about is some very large disrupting events occur in the solar system that destroys the balance of these three structures. And that's basically it. That's the entire series. And it's very good. It's very, very good. What makes it so good and why people liked it so much is that they work extremely hard to get the science right. So
Like, that's cool.
Their ships, like when their ships break, they literally do a 180 and then do reverse thrusting. There's no magic. And it can take them days to slow down. It's not just like, oh, we just stop. And then they actually have to figure out the inertia, and then even the ways the ships are designed, and the way even the military weapons work. Like they only have a limited number, and then they don't even fire torpedoes. All they do is fire shrapnel. And they're like, and then let the shrapnel go and rip it apart. They're like, that's good enough, so they get into it like in really deep levels, and in fact, to the point that gravity is a weapon. Like they just use because gravity will kill you, and they use that as a weapon. Like everything, it's fascinating.
That's cool.
Yeah,
okay,
you like it a lot.
This up. Yeah.
Because that's all it is. And they go into it, and it's a major part. It's not on the side. It's as part, if not more, than Dune. And it ends. It just goes, and there's 6 seasons, and then it ended. So
okay, cool. Yeah,
I will say it's really weird. Like it starts off like as a monster of a week, and you're like, "What the hell does this have to do with anything?" and it really does. And then it gets really weird, but it eventually starts to get more interesting, I would say, and into the geopolitics by the 3rd season, because then you start finding out like what's really going on, and it gets weird. It's all, but it's hard. It's super hard. I wouldn't even call it hard science fiction. I call it super hard science fiction.
Okay.
Because everything has
like
a
Martian
reason.
level hard.
What's that?
Martian level hard.
Martian level hard. Yeah, the
That's
Martian.
excellent.
It's like if they can't figure out how to do it, then it's probably not in there. And they try to make it as realistic as possible. They even like the types, they have a generational ship, and they explain how that works. Like it doesn't just magically work. Like they have a generational ship that they built for 50 years. Because it took so long to build something like this, and then how they figure out every aspect of this thing so it can take a journey for 300 years to Alpha Centauri, and so they explain that.
That's cool.
And it's actually
That's
the Mormons
cool.
who built the ship. And then they go through.
That doesn't
like,
surprise me.
I know that's what I'm saying. It's really funny. Like they go into all that, and like even how guns work, and how like military works, and how and there's a big part. That's actually a big part of it is how weapon systems and even hacking other computer systems. Like when they show, that's actually the best part, when Mars, every so often the Mars battleships will show up, and when that happens, those episodes I rub my hands together like, oh goody, because they show like, okay, like when they start attacking, the first thing they do is they start hacking the other ships immediately. They're like start hacking them and get into it. I'm like, they're not even bothering with weapons, they're just hacking in. I was like, that's
wonderful.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I was like, that is so accurate.
When it takes so long to build something like that, if you can recover it with a hack,
exactly,
and take it over,
yes,
like you've just saved so much money.
Well, they go into that. They even go into like salvage rights and like who gets what ships, and they go into like, that's a big thing. The Belters are very much into the salvage, and that's their economy, is they go around and they take all this stuff that other people don't take. It's really fascinating. I think it would like
cool.
It quite
I'm gonna
bit.
have to look this up. Okay.
Yeah, I gave you a whole. Okay, you got Fables.
Fables.
You got the Expanse.
The Expanse.
What was the Founder? The Founder is a 2-hour movie, but it's got an all-star cast, and it's fascinating because it's real. It's it's a little abridged, but it shows how McDonald's became McDonald's using geopolitics.
Okay,
that's why I think you'll like it, because you'll see. They don't. It's just like, because a lot of people were doing it, but why did they succeed? And they explain how they are able to outmaneuver everyone else. So
that's cool.
So wait, what is your? If you really like Dune, I'm trying to think what other series are out there that probably explore this, other than the standards 3 or 4 we're talking about.
Ender's Game does a poor job, I feel like.
Ender's Game? Yeah. Ender's Game is terrible.
Like there's no good reason for the
why
the
do they even bother? I always hate that.
There's no good reason.
No, you know what? Ender's Game is up there with Starship Troopers, except I like Starship Troopers way more. And they're both goofy.
You have to look at Starship, not the comic book, but the movie. You have to look at the Starship Troopers as
masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece of political philosophy.
Masterpiece.
Like, holy cow. Like, I go back and rewatch Starship Troopers, and I'm like,
because it is.
Yeah.
My brother, because my brother's a costume designer, it's like obviously they made all the costumes look like the SS, and like they do all the costumes based on the Nazis. It's like really well done with all the propaganda and the fascism of that. It's
so good.
It's so
such a good
well
film.
done. The book is interesting though. The book is fascinating.
The book is interesting, but it's not so much like it's an internal person's struggle.
Yes,
more than it is.
It has nothing
a treaty
to do
and
with
political
that.
philosophy. But yeah,
it has nothing to do with. What's the other one? Oh, the Forever War. Do you ever read the Forever War?
I don't think I've heard of that. The Forever War.
Put that up. Okay, that's an analogy also for Vietnam, but it's basically about troopers who go and are fighting war, and it takes them like 50 years to get to the battlefield. So this one guy, it's about one guy who basically is in this war, and it takes place because he keeps going from like place to place over like a course of 1,000 years, because every time he has to go into hypersleep, it takes another 100 years to get there, and then the technology keeps expanding, and by the time the end, that's
by Haldeman, right?
Yeah, and
he was a professor teaching sci-fi courses at MIT at the time that I was there. I never took his course, but I was always like, he was a real sci-fi author who will come up in conversations like this. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, the Forever War is fascinating because what ends up happening is that he's been around for so long. By the time he gets back to Earth, he doesn't understand anything. He's basically completely alienated because technology and culture has passed him by so far that he has no idea,
no ability to connect with it at all. Yeah,
but it's a very similar concept. It's a good book. It's really good.
So we had a super chat from Eric S. Riley wondering which RPG systems or settings do you feel have done geopolitics well?
There is one singular standout.
Just one
that I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Well, the question specifically was RPG, not necessarily setting. True. So when I see RPG, what that means to me is Stars Without Number by Sinomine, I think is how you pronounce it.
Never even heard of it.
It is a 5th edition-ish light OSR pseudo type of RPG where you play as, I don't know, freelance contractors in a sci-fi setting. Just doing odd and end mission jobs type stuff. If you like 5th edition or Pathfinder, if you like the crunch of it, it's probably not quite enough for you. But if you want something that's a little bit less crunchy but still has kind of that meat to it, it's definitely good for that. But specifically why I say that it's a good RPG for this is because the world building toolkit that is in the back of that book has a faction management system that lays on top of a star system generation process that is absolutely phenomenal at understanding what a faction has as far as its ideology, how that ideology influences the assets that it has, how it manages, how those different factions manage the movement of their assets through the star systems, and how those different interactions set up ways for you to it's just a world ripe for quest hooks. And in a matter of one evening, you can just do a bunch of dice rolls and get a phenomenally immersive story. And it's specifically designed to be run as like kind of a solo game in between game sessions, so that the game session, that's 1 month worth of play basically, and then you have, or 1 week worth of play, and then you run through what's called the faction turns, where the interactions of the faction and how they interact with the star systems kind of, it's like getting the nightly news report of all the stuff that happens with the faction interactions and how they work with the star systems, and that sets you up for quest hooks that your little mercenary group of players can interact with when they sit back down at the table. Absolutely phenomenal system.
That reminds me a lot of, although it sounds like it's more in depth, the way that factions progress their clocks and blades in the dark during the downtime in between your when you do a job. There's a downtime and you de-stress and do things like that, and then the GM basically advances clocks on factions' goals. Like each faction, like one might be trying to like get these weird paranormal artifacts, and so you roll and see like how far did they advance the clock on getting those artifacts. How did the PC's actions possibly push them back if they were an opponent or something like that? But it's very simple. It's just like everybody's got a goal. In Blades, it's very simple. It sounds like this is much more in depth with the factions taking their turn.
I would say that it's not so much that like there isn't like when you have like a calendar events or like a clock like that, that's really good for like a smaller scale game. But it also presupposes that like the goal is just not survival. Like at the root of it in this kind of a setup, like the goal is survival, and everybody is worried and paranoid of other factions that might make them not survive. Right, like that when you get to that level of statecraft or whatever, it's just a fear of losing control over your own life is basically the root cause of all of this, these power dynamics. So, and the system in Worlds Without Number, there's also a fantasy version. I don't know why I didn't think of this. Of it's Stars Without Number, Worlds Without Number, and Godbound. Godbound is more of like an epic fantasy version of the same type of mechanics, but those three games are all in the same. They're all by the same guy, the same publisher. They all do kind of the same thing, but Worlds Without Number, Stars Without. Is it?
Looks like Godbound has a free edition.
Yes,
that people could check out.
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal if you want to check that out, though. But they're like, and he specifically like the RPG has kind of a preloaded philosophy about running the game as well. Just as a warning, like if you're the type of person who does Monster of the Week, you're probably not going to enjoy that school of RPG, just because the game presupposes that the sandbox is the correct way to play. So it comes loaded with that philosophy into it, but as far as handling that's absolutely French kiss.
Wow, so we're almost 2 hours in, and in exactly 1 week time, it's 4:52. You and I will probably be at the steakhouse having shrimp cocktails.
Oh man, exactly. What's your favorite cocktail, Steven? Are you an old-fashioned guy?
No, I don't drink cocktails. I'm a beer guy.
Oh, you're a beer guy.
Yes,
okay. What's your favorite kind of beer?
Wheat or amber.
Wheat. Okay.
So I'll drink Blue Moon.
Okay.
Also Japanese beers. I like a lot of Japanese beers, or
like Japanese lagers, or
so I like beers like a Kai, all those, and
okay.
I also like Spain. When I was in Spain, I forgot what I was drinking, but it was fantastic. All the beer in Spain, but
I don't think I've ever had any Spanish beers.
Oh, it was so good. It was everywhere I went. It was $3 too. It was like everywhere I went. And the funny thing in Spain, it's like, what do you want? Beer. Like, okay. It was like, do you have others? Like, no, we have one. Everyone had one. It was like one beer. That was it. It was like it was like the beer, and it was excellent. It was fantastic. I don't even remember what it was, but I had it everywhere I went. But no, they have shrimp cocktail. The shrimp cocktail is St. Elmo's is what they're famous for.
Okay.
It's the only cocktail Steven enjoys is shrimp cocktail. Well, if you look it up, that's their. So people, places are famous for something. When you go, they have the kitchen, and then there's the table where they like serve the food, and you'll see it when we go because you walk past it. Half of the table of this counter is just covered, like 5 deep of shrimp cocktails. There's like 100 of them because they're just coming out so fast because everyone orders them because they're that good. It's 4 massive shrimp swimming in a sea of the cocktail sauce, which is some of the hottest strongest sauce you've ever had in your
All
life.
right, that sounds good. I love really pungent flavors.
Well,
so
then this will
good.
be like,
all right,
it's a punch to the face and then another punch to the face.
plenty of horseradish and chili.
Well, that's what makes it so good is that
Yeah.
you can buy it. I see some people are asking you. They sell the sauce, by the way. You can buy it separately because so for my birthday, my wife and my son bought shrimp and got the sauce for me because they weren't going to get it, but they actually got the sauce. And then they put out like a little like shrimp platter, and because they've heard about me talking about this thing for like 20 years, and then they're like, how hot could it be? So they like, took like a big thing, but they're like, oh, they were dying. They were like, oh my God, this is so hot. And because
That's wonderful.
because it's horseradish,
Oh yeah.
it just punches you in the face and rips
it
through
gets
your,
all in your sinuses.
it rips through your sinuses, but then a minute later you're totally fine. It's not like a hot sauce. Like the hot sauce
Right.
sticks with you in the capsaicin, it stays in your tongue and locks in your receptors, so it's stuck with you for hours. But this, because it's like a wasabi, it just punches you really hard and then goes away, which is much more tolerable. Ah, yes, it's so good. Up your dog. My dog's here too. My dog's sleeping there.
Here's my dog Dova.
What's her name?
He's named after Dova. His name is after the word for dragon in Skyrim.
Ah, I have mine's named after Zoe. It's not named after anything. I just like the word. So.
There you go.
Well, all of our dogs are E. I've had Snoopy, Taffy, Cookie, Bitsy, Zoe, Ruby. It's like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's all, I don't know why, it just is. So that's like, so yes, this is Zoe. Even though it's the sound. It's not that they actually end in a Y or an E. It's just the E sound. But yeah, she's sleeping here right next to the vent. Her favorite thing is to put her face in the air conditioning and just sleep on front of it. Yes. Steven, my dog's names are cute. Hey, 95% of those I had nothing to do with because I grew up with those dogs. So that's my parents had everything to do with that. That's Taffy, Candy, Snoopy, Bitsy, Zoe, Ruby. Missing a few. I had so many dogs. Stinky. Whatever.
You had a dog named Stinky?
I wasn't born. Sorry, it was before I was even born. My parents had a dog, and I was like a baby, so I never met Stinky.
Stinky.
It's Stinky.
That's funny.
But the dog, Snoopy, was 3 months younger than me, and she lived to almost 18. So I had this one dog until I was a senior in high school, which was weird. Like you have a dog literally your whole life. Like it was that's bizarre.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yogi, there's another one.
Somebody said their dog's name is Yogi. That's great.
But yeah, in 1 week's time, it's St. Elmo's. Got that reservation.
All right.
Well, it's early, but who cares? Well, you know what? I'm going to be hungry anyhow because I'll fly and get in and won't eat it. Next thing you know, and at Gen Con, hours are meaningless. Let me tell you.
Right.
Time is
totally
meaningless
makes sense.
at Gen Con.
Time is fluid. It melts like in persistence of memory.
It is.
So
it's
funny.
like you will
like
eat.
A dolly clock.
You'll eat when you're hungry, and time has no meaning. The only downside is that things, and that's what I recommend, is I do carry around food with me because they don't stay open that late. After around 9 or 10, it gets a little hard to find food. There's a few things open, but as you can imagine, one restaurant open late at night with a convention with over 100,000 people gets just a little bit
completely
crowded.
demolished.
You can't even walk near it. It's like ridiculous. How much it is.
I'll probably on my way up. I'll probably just honestly stop and get like stuff to make sandwiches and leave it in the hotel room, just so I can avoid that kind of nonsense.
Well, no. So what you can do is I can show you. If you stick with me, because I have there's a couple places that we go to that are just a 10-minute walk, and because
that's not bad,
right? And they're just far enough that people won't do it, and it's good food. And it's.
Are you gonna quote Scar from The Lion King? Stick with me, and you'll never go hungry again.
Sure, you stick with me. You know what? That's my whole life. You stick with me, you will never go hungry because I've been well, because my wife is a foodie. So like the first thing we do when we plan trips, we plan every meal. and then we plan the trip around the meals. So like, but seriously, like we plan our breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and even like what desserts we're getting, like for every day. Like it's all planned out because we have to make sure we get all. Because you only get so many meals, and every meal has to be an A+. You can't have a crappy meal. Every meal has to be perfect.
No, I totally get that. There's nothing that makes me more sad than like bad food. Like,
yeah,
like like, and it's not even like like poor quality. Like if it's just like poor quality food, like it just does. If it tastes like mush, and like that's not even like you can make the most cheap poverty meal taste amazing. Like beans and rice can taste phenomenal. So like, why are we even wasting our time?
Right. There
like,
is one exception is that there's a mall next door and there's a food court there. And I'm not going to say it's great, but it's actually better than a lot of the other First, it's better than the food in the convention because the food in the convention stinks. So so don't do that. There are food trucks, but and everyone's like, oh, the food trucks. I'm like, first of all,
it's going to be $24 for a street taco.
Exactly. It's like gas. It's like $20 for a street taco the size of your pinky. They're always, and the food's way too small. The line is an hour long, and then you have to wait another hour for them to call out your name. It's hot as hell. You're standing on concrete, on black asphalt. So I'm like, yeah, exactly. I was like, I don't know why you guys all like the food trucks. I think they suck. I mean, I get it, and I think they're good, but not for me. I would actually rather go to the air-conditioned mall and get okay Subway, which isn't great, but it's fine.
Subway's fine.
It's fast. It's sit down, and it's air-conditioned. And you're in and
not
out.
only that, like you're there. You spent the money to go to Gen Con to play games, not to wait. Like if it's an hour-long wait every time you got to eat,
so bad.
That's 2 to 3 hours of your life every day that you're just sacrificing to stand in the heat for.
That's why I don't mind. That's why I don't mind going to the food court once in a while. It's mostly the dinners. The breakfast.
I can see that.
Get whatever you want. Usually what I did in the past is there used to be an Einstein's Bagels there, and I would actually get like Einstein bagels with fillings for like 3 days. And then I'm like, here, it's breakfast for Monday, breakfast for Thursday, breakfast for Friday, breakfast for Saturday. Like all my breakfast is ready. So I had that.
Right.
And then for lunch, I'll put it this way. What I will sometimes do, when they used to have the food trucks, you had to walk through them. So if I walk through the food trucks, and if there was something that has a short line that I knew was okay, because like St. Elmo's has like a small St. Elmo's there. Like there's a couple that are actually decent and are reasonable. And if I see those and the line's only like 5-10 minutes, I will get that. But there's a couple that I'm just like, someone wrote the Islands Noodles. Oh my God, the Islands Noodles line is so long, and I'm like,
they were writing it when you were talking about lines being really long.
So bad. It's like I'm like, it's freaking noodles, man. You don't need. It's like you get that anywhere. Who cares? But there's a couple of hidden places that we go for lunch or the food court, and then for dinner. The dinners I usually go somewhere really good. Well, there's a couple in the hotels that are really good. I go to St. Elmo's. There used to be Paranti Brothers. I think it closed and became the Yard, which is a chain, but the Yard's actually pretty good. We talked about this last week, Professor. It's actually one of the better chain places, I'd say.
Okay.
But we'll find some places.
Sweet.
I wouldn't worry. But you'll have a car, so
I'll have a
drive
car.
Places. I've never done
I'm
that.
I'm probably just going to Uber from the hotel though to the con.
No, I'm
not staying at the convention.
Yeah, either am I. Which is like everyone. I can't believe it this year.
I'll just Uber.
Yeah, well, I know, but I'm like 10 miles away. It's kind of annoying.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I'm a 10-minute drive, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's. I think it's a 20-minute drive. It's not that bad, but it's like that's the closest I can get. It was like really hard this year. I mean, I don't think it'll matter, but it's annoying as hell. I liked being across the street. So the rest of the stream is all about food. Hey, man.
Well, I mean, we could move in and talk about that analysis of Wizards of the Coast geopolitically, or we could do a food-based analysis.
Well, we have to go. We have another stream in 25 minutes. We need to go.
Yeah.
For DMs,
I can come back on and we can do a breakdown of
WoTC.
do a geopop of WoTC.
Yeah.
But
any good cookbook recommendations? The D&D cookbook I hear is very popular.
So I was like, this book is going to be a bunch of garbage, right? That's what I thought. And then somebody got that book for me just as I don't know if it was a gag gift or if they got it for me on purpose because, I'm a D&D nerd. But my wife started making recipes out of that book and it's not bad. It's not bad.
So if you want, I'll actually give you said any good cookbook? Okay, Ryan King. I'm hard to stump, buddy. I'm pretty tough. So Cooks Illustrated, that is my favorite. It's a bi-monthly publication. You can look it up. And they do deep dives into foods and dishes, and it's fantastic. And they do really good reviews. They had like Mexican corn one month, but not just regular Mexican corn. It's all told. You'd like this, Mark. All the articles are in a narrative style where they explain how they went about to someone actually is the article will be like how I made the juiciest burger ever. And then they go through the whole process of how they did it and what they tested and what worked and didn't work and how they finally got it. And it took 25 tries. And then they go through the whole life cycle of building this perfect burger and then explain how to make it certain ways. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so much fun to read this book. It's this magazine, and all the pictures a lot of them are done as physical illustrations. So they do have some pictures, but everything's illustrated beautifully with sort of a line art colored drawing. It's almost like pencil sketches.
Right.
But look it up.
There was also a super chat from Blade Riven back when we were talking about series on geopolitics that said Honor Harrington by Dave Weber is about interstellar geopolitics and war and the limitations of interstellar tech.
I have read that a long time ago. The Harry Harrington. Honor Harrington, yes, saga, a long time ago. Those books are pretty old. How about the Belgariad? You ever read the Belgariad?
I don't do much fiction reading.
Well, it's fantasy.
I don't, and most of my stuff that I read is nonfiction.
Okay. I mean, there's not a lot in that, but there is one thing where there's all these different lands and each of them are known for something. And there is a part where they are invading the world, or different parts of the world. And they do have a whole section of how do they feed the army? And they actually go through logistics of how the food has to actually get to the battlefields before the army does. So they're ready. And it's fascinating because they do talk about that. Yeah. It's not great. It's very cartoony. I'd say it's if a Marvel movie was a fantasy series, that would be the Belgariad, but it's fun. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. It's a fun series and it's a huge bestseller for a reason, That is also something where they talk about is that the wizard, one of the main wizards in the book, is that he becomes a disciple of a god, and the god makes him learn about things, and he literally does that where he has to learn about mountains, and he spends 20 years to learn about just the topic of mountains and nothing but mountains. And then he has to spend 50 years to learn about forests and just forests. But time stopped for him, so he didn't realize it's 50 years. To him, it's just it could have been a week, but it's actually been 50 years of real time. So he's lived for 2,000 years, and again, because he ends up being, quote, a wizard and knowledgeable and everything, because his god required him to spend so much time to learn on one topic that he became the super master of that topic, and then ended up learning about every topic. That's there's actually a standalone book based on him. I forgot what it was called. It was not his daughter was Polgaria. It was a Belgariad the Sorcerer, I think is what it's called. And it's
Bulgaria the Sorcerer.
Yeah, it's just about him, and it's fascinating because it talks about how he gets trained by a god and becomes like Gandalf, basically. That's the whole book.
Right,
and then he starts getting involved with the geopolitics of the world and all that stuff. So it's fun.
Cool.
Anyhow, we should go, Mark, because we got another stream coming up.
That makes sense.
From 6 to 9, we're gonna be in DM's lair.
That's right.
Oh my god,
fun.
That's way too much streaming.
It's a lot.
Well, enjoy your
sorcerer.
bathroom.
That's right. It's a sorcerer. Yeah. I'm gonna keep saying it that way until everyone says it that way.
Sorcerer. All right, it's a thing.
I mean, that's how you get the tastiest food is with the sorcerer.
Horseradish, or hey, you know what? Hey, look, I'm from New York. What do you want from me? Everyone pronounces things differently, okay?
How do you say swords and sorcery, Steven?
Swords and sorcery. Well, how do you say aluminum?
Aluminium.
See, there you go. I was going to say,
there you go.
Some people say aluminium. How about ketchup or ketchup? See, yeah, I mean, I say ketchup. So.
Or Australians with green peppers, they call them capsicums.
All right, there you go.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Worcester.
Say Worcester.
Oh, Worcester. Worcester, Massachusetts.
I mean, you could say Worcester if you want.
Well, I couldn't read it with
Worcestershire.
my eyes. Yeah, no, Worcester, because I had a lot of friends who grew up in Worcester, so I used to go there a lot. So
my favorite British pronunciation is Chumley, which really looks like it should be pronounced like Chalmondeley, but it's Chumley. It's just like all those consonants go away.
Oh yeah.
Well, there you go. Well, definitely having you on more. This was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we didn't even talk. I don't know what the hell we were talking about. We were just talking about crap. But all these
we were
things...
talking about a bunch of different geopolitical series and especially in sci-fi as well as some in fantasy. So that's
just funny because you're like, science fiction does it so poorly, and then that's all we talked about.
Well, because people were interested in what the mistakes were. Like that's what the episode title is. So it makes sense that we focused on.
I forgot about the title.
How to not mess up.
There we go.
So
I guess so. Well, because
you'll all be able to see us on DM's Lair later tonight, and we're planning on coming on again tomorrow, right, Steven?
Oh yes. So
at 2 p.m.
2 p.m. with Jess. So everyone who stayed late, you get to see your favorite person, Jess.
To talk about the remaster.
So Mark, you need to. I read through it, but I'm not the one who needs to read through it. It's you need to.
Yeah, I read through it.
As the person who co-wrote the rules, you are the one who's. No one gives a crap what I think. They probably are more interested to hear what Jess thinks because everyone likes Jess. But you're the man on the hot seat because you co-wrote the rules.
Are you implying that everyone doesn't like you, Steven?
No, I'm not implying I know it. So.
Oh, okay, fair enough. So yeah, you could I'll be in the hot seat on that. I definitely have some.
Oh, DM's Lair. Yeah, I got the link.
I definitely have some opinions on the fixation with the cantrip damage changes because.
Oh, I saw those numbers.
I feel like that the reason why the changes were made is not the reason that everyone is assuming, and so therefore they've begged a question by assuming certain rationales for the change that turns out to be different. So we can get into that on tomorrow's episode, but I'll tease that given how much people have been talking about cantrips. I think they'll be interested to hear that tomorrow.
Yeah, cool. Anything that changes the math, I have issues with. It's like, you want to change the words, fine, go crazy. You want to start changing math, you better have a really, 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 really good reason to change the math.
Well, I think I know what the reason is, and people are assuming that the reason is that they want to change the math because they don't like the math, and I think that reason is not correct. That is not why it happened, and I will not tell everyone here because you'll need to watch our show tomorrow if you want me to say it.
Yeah, I'm actually glad they put out that came out of nowhere. I didn't even know about that, and I'm usually pretty in the know for these things, but that kind of even took me for surprise because I didn't know that was coming out.
Yeah, I saw it, but I didn't know in advance that they were going to do it.
Yeah, I didn't know. Well, I knew they were doing something. I didn't know it was coming out. I guess it makes sense because that's the link that's in the Rage of Elements book, and Rage of Elements comes out next week. And officially, so they kind of need the link to work. So, I mean, I guess it made sense. I just thought it was going to come out probably next week, not today. But, they got it out early. And there's a lot in there. That PDF is actually packed. I was like, this is great. It's actually really good. It gives us not a full overview, but a massive overview of the changes they're making in Pathfinder. And I thought it was, very good, very detailed, way more than I expected. So, all right, I got to figure out what I'm going to do for dinner because now I can't eat until 9 o'clock. So...
Yeah,
I literally might just leave you guys and go eat for 15 minutes and come back. So
yeah, I mean, that's what I was worried about before this stream. So I got a few snacks just in case it went directly through.
Yeah, but no. Yeah, we'll hang out, Baron. We'll play games. We'll show you around. We're gonna have. I want to get together a whole party. I got you.
Right.
I got Professor. Let's see who else. Nonat's gonna be there. Derek is gonna be there. Who else is gonna be there? I think Grady and those guys are gonna be there from the Goblin. I got me, John Stats, the Roll for Comment guys. Like half of my guys are gonna be there. It's gonna be nuts, man. It's gonna be roaming through the halls, trying to find other YouTubers to get into like little beefs with. Maybe we'll have like a little showdown, like a little gangs in New York. Little
tell DM's Lair. I'll get into a fisticuff with him for content if he wants.
Oh really? We'll show up. Well, Ginny D, the Dungeon Dudes, and someone else are doing like a talk, and we should just all show up and crash and be like, "Yeah, man, here we go, let's go." No, like it's like everyone in one place. Let's go. But all right, yeah. Tomorrow at 2, we're going to talk about all these changes, which I think a lot of people are going to be. That's why I said, Mark, I don't even need to be there. Just you and Jess. People like Jess. People want to hear from you. I'll just.
You're the one who makes it all happen, though, Steven.
That's all right. Yeah, because I have the computer. You know what? I'll give you the OBS files. You can do it yourself. So,
I mean, I probably could, but I think that it's more fun to have the regular hosts on when we're doing a Roll for Comment Live.
I'm kidding, sort of.
Unless Jess is going to actually take over the stream, like she was joking about.
No, I don't know when her to take over the stream. So, all right. What about where can they find you, Baron?
Where can they find me? I try to limit my social media because I just don't like social media. So YouTube is it. Dungeon Masterpiece is my YouTube channel.
Wow.
My wife is calling me.
There you go.
But yeah, check me out on Dungeon Masterpiece. I've got almost 100 videos there. And I've got a playlist where you can learn about some of my musings about fantasy world building and geopolitics on there. So check that out.
And we will be right back later tonight and tomorrow. And then I don't know after that, because then I go to Gen Con and then I'm on vacation. So
heck yeah.
Well, while you're at Gen Con, I'm going to try to get a lot of writing done.
Yeah, you better.
Yeah.
Better get it all done.
Except I generally do take my birthday off, which is normally during Gen Con, but this year
no birthdays.
It's just before Gen Con.
No birthdays.
Well, happy birthday, Mark.
Well, thank you.
How old are you? 52?
Not quite yet.
In dwarf years.
Oh, in dwarf years. Well, there you go.
So, all right. See you guys later.
See you.
Bye, everybody.